Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's talk boxing news, not fight predictions, but just some stories that I think you need to know about that are happening in the world of boxing. It appears that Kelly Pavlik, at the age of 30, has decided to retire from the sport. He had a fight set up with Andre Ward, and that by itself should set off alarm bells because Kelly Pavlik really was most effective at 160. He was going to fight Andre Ward at 168 pounds. If you're going to fight at 168, why not start with the best? Ward suffered an injury that required surgery. Apparently, the delay convinced Kelly Pavlik that he just didn't have the fire anymore to train properly, to continue the dedication. Even fighting a great fighter like Andre Ward wasn't enough motivation for him to continue in the sport. Now, let me just say, I know we're in an era where you have fighters like Bernard Hopkins, Vitaly Klitschko, fighting in their 40s at an elite level, right? You have other fighters, Glenn Johnson, Roy Jones Jr., who are in their 40s and they continue to fight on, right? They had belts at one time, they've lost the belts, but they continue to keep going, right? Even some of the biggest names in boxing, guys deservedly on the pound for pound list, are older than you think, right? Floyd Mayweather is in his mid-30s. Vladimir Klitschko is in his mid-30s, right? Fans of boxing need to understand that this is new. While guys certainly have fought at older ages in the past, they haven't been as successful as the current generation, right? Bernard Hopkins literally set the record for the oldest man to win a title. Understand, when George Foreman came back, people thought he was crazy. Well, Bernard Hopkins today is older than George Foreman was when Foreman won the heavyweight title. Nutrition's gotten better, preparation has gotten better, because the paydays have gotten better. The fighters don't have to fight that often. So a fighter like Floyd Mayweather can literally fight once or twice a year and still command big purses and can still stay in the public's imagination. The way things used to be were very different, right? Marvin Hagler retired at age 32. Gene Tunney, the man who beat Jack Dempsey, former heavyweight champion, retired at 31. Rocky Marciano, unbeaten heavyweight champion, retired at 32. That's the way it used to be, right? But let me candidly say, boxing's always had a problem with guys retiring and then coming back to the sport, right? Sugar Ray Robinson retired. He came back, fought for several more years. I saw Glenn Johnson, after the Fonfara fight, make a very eloquent statement in the ring that this was it for him. He was done, right? He was in his 40s. Guys of his generation, many of them had stopped fighting. He was going to move on with the rest of his life. The next thing I knew, Glenn Johnson was announcing that he was going to fight George Groves. Right now, we're hearing that Jorge Arce, who declared that he was retired after losing to Nonito Donaire, of course, is itching to get back in the ring now and only a few months have passed, right? It's like a drug. The adulation, the excitement, the idea of being before the fans, the idea of competing, it's very hard for guys to give up. I, for one, am glad that Kelly Pavlik is calling it a day. Let me first say this, and I don't say it lightly. I'm very interested in what boxers have to say after fights. And, many boxers are very honest when asked direct questions about who their toughest opponents have been, who their toughest fights are, right? Floyd Mayweather, candidly, whenever he's asked who were your toughest opponents, one of the names he always mentions was Emmanuel Augustus, right? You're saying, who? What? Not a star-driven name. But for Floyd, he remembers that fight, and he remembers how difficult it was. Well, today, if you ask the great Sergio Martinez who his toughest fight was, one of the names he mentions, and he only mentions 2 or 3 names, but one of the names he always mentions is Kelly Pavlik. Kelly Pavlik was a very tough matchup for anyone because he had a long, stiff jab and he had big power behind the jab, right? You had to get through his boxing construct to get to him, and he had length. He was tall for his weight, right? So you're talking about a guy with an excellent jab who knew how to hide his body behind the jab and who had concussive, very hard punching power. Keep in mind, even though Martinez won their fight, Kelly Pavlik did have his moments in that fight. I consider Martinez to be the toughest opponent that Kelly Pavlik fought in his career, and apparently the feeling is mutual because Sergio Martinez views Pavlik as one of the toughest opponents he's faced. Let me just say this, though. I looked at Pavlik in a fight against Alfonso Lopez, and it was clear to me that Kelly Pavlik's reflexes had dimmed. Boxing is a young man's sport. Anyone who saw Mike Tyson in the ring in his late 20s understood that he didn't have the reflexes that he had in his early 20s. If you're a fan of Muhammad Ali, I would make the argument that prime Ali was mid-1960s Ali, the Ali who takes out the big cat, Cleveland Williams, right? That's prime Ali. I believe Ali peaked early. By the time we get to the 1970s, by the time Ali is fighting Jerry Quarry and then Joe Frazier, I believe Ali was maybe 85% of himself. He certainly had lost a huge degree of his legs. He was still in his 20s, right? Let's not look at the outlier guys, the Bernard Hopkinses, and reach the conclusion that guys have reflexes well into their 30s. That's just not the case. I thought Kelly Pavlik had lost some of his reflexes by the time he fought that Lopez fight, right? Kelly wasn't that fast to begin with. If you look at his fights against Jermaine Taylor, it's clear that Taylor had a hand speed advantage. He wasn't that fast to begin with, but he had better reflexes than he did when he fought Lopez and was getting hit routinely. If you look at the Sergio Martinez film, the one thing that stands out is how much Martinez was able to hit Pavlik. Pavlik's actually bloody under both of his eyes. The point is simply, I believe we saw prime Pavlik, right? Just like Ali was prime in the 60s. And then in the 70s, you saw a guy a little past his prime hanging in there against big-time competition, right? I believe Kelly Pavlik had already passed his prime. And of course now, he was heading into even deeper waters, because if getting hit by a 160-pounder might hurt. Having dimmed reflexes and now fighting at 168 would hurt a lot more, right? And keep in mind, some of the guys at 168 have huge punches, right? Carl Froch, big hitter at 168. You know, Kelly Pavlik, who had been a champion, didn't want to be a journeyman in any weight class. If he was going to enter the water at 168, he needed to make sure, if he's going to enhance his legacy, that he would fight the elites. Well, guess what? You got tough guys at 168. Mikhail Kessler, right? Tough guys. I believe James DeGale and Lucien Boutte need to be included in the conversation. Of course, I consider Andre Ward to be the best. The point, though, is simply that's the level of competition that Kelly Pavlik was going to have to fight to stay relevant, right? Don't forget, too, Arthur Abraham lurking in the background. The point is simply, fighters know, in my opinion, when they have lost interest in the sport. When whatever it is that got them up at 5 and 6 in the morning to do road work and stuff like that is no longer there, right? And I believe Kelly Pavlik had to be honest with himself. He had to know the morning after fights that guys were now hitting him in the face, right? At least when he was fighting elite competition. I don't consider guys like Aaron Jacko elite competition, but when he was in the ring with guys like Sergio Martinez, they were hitting him in the face. He also had to know, too, that there were certain things he wasn't going to be able to change. When you're late 20s and you've been fighting for a long time, early 30s, and you still don't intuitively bend your legs, move your head, roll with punches, I got bad news for you. You're not going to learn that. The guys who learn new skills are the ones who literally have interpreted the sport that way for a long time, right? They're the guys who have grown up incorporating skills into their game. I don't believe Kelly Pavlik was going to learn slickness in his early 30s, right? I don't think he was going to be able to go in the ring and suddenly show us a lot of head movement and suddenly, bend at the waist and, bob and weave and stuff. He was not going to be Dmitry Pirog anytime soon. And so if he has money in the bank, if he no longer has the fire to make the sacrifices, and they're huge sacrifices, right? It's not just staying at weight, watching your diet, right? It's also the idea that you have to hop in the ring and get hit by guys, sparring partners, who are trying to make a name for themselves. You have to toughen yourself up. You have to mentally prepare for a championship fight against a world-class fighter who's trying to hurt you, right? And there's the health risk. Let me just tell you, one of the sad things with getting older, and I'm in my late 40s, is that I remember as a little kid watching fighters like Muhammad Ali talk trash. He was articulate. I remember back then we didn't have ESPN and the 24-hour sports news cycle. So you would see an interview of Ali. I remember they had an interview of Ali when he went to Africa to fight George Foreman. And Ali shows up. He was married at the time. He had a woman with him. She apparently wasn't his wife. Long story. He was talking to the press. He was joking with guys. The charisma was obvious. He knew members of the press. He just seemed to be having a fun time. He was a guy who looked like he enjoyed being on the world stage. And it's rough because when you get older, you actually watch guys like this, especially if you watch boxing, literally go from prime time to having health problems. And the health problems don't develop for years. I was shocked when I heard that Jimmy Young, one of my favorite fighters from the 1970s, had passed, and that he apparently may have had boxing-related health problems. Well, let's go deeper. The Quarry brothers. Just Google these guys. They were huge in the 1970s. Not just Jerry Quarry, who I believe beat Ernie Shavers, but also Mike Quarry. And of course, these guys developed boxing-related injuries. Right? The problem is that the health problems don't show up when guys are in their prime. They show up years later. And then it's sad because then you're watching an idol who you remember. I mean, I remember Ali talking about Foreman, talking about what he was going to do and stuff like that. And then I remember years later, I saw Ali in an interview. This was before the Holmes fight. He had a mustache. I remember thinking, what's Ali doing with a mustache? And he was talking, and I could not understand what he was saying. Right? Well, let me just say, keep in mind, health's a fragile thing. By the time we got to the Olympics in Atlanta and Ali came out to light the torch, his hands, which were among the fastest hands in boxing, blinding hand speed for a heavyweight, right? His hands were shaking so badly, I was wondering if he was going to be able to light the torch. If you're Kelly Pavlik and you've spent your entire life, preparing to be champion, and then you're a champion, you've scaled the mountain, and you're in boxing, I have no doubt that Kelly Pavlik's looking at sparring partners. Keep in mind, he's surrounded by some older guys too. They're guys in your corner, right? Who have been in the game for a long time. And I'm sure he's encountered guys. He's fought guys who've had to take time off because of boxing-related injuries. Right? You remember the hiatus Jermaine Taylor took after he got knocked out by Arthur Abraham. Let me just say, too, Taylor has yet to reemerge on the world stage. He's fighting journeyman. So Kelly Pavlik doesn't want that to happen to him. The time to do something about it is now. He's 30. He's getting out of the sport. He's giving himself the best chance for life after boxing. And let me just say, we're seeing now in football, in these CTE scans, that literally young men have proteins in their brains that hint of long-term brain injury, right? And so all I can say is I support Kelly Pavlik. I feel we've already seen prime Pavlik. Had Pavlik continued, I'm sure he would have had a few more victories along the way, right? In some fights. But I don't believe he would have been as good as he had been at 160 in the past. Let me also say, too, I believe that, it's the boxer's decision on whether to continue. Let me just take this opportunity to say, Steve Collins, Roy Jones, please don't. A fight is past its expiration date when young people who are avid boxing fans have no idea who Steve Collins was, right? I'm not sure what either guy gains by having that fight now. It'll be as forgettable as Jeff Fennick against Azuma Nelson. Look that up. These two guys years later hopped in the ring. While I'm sure it netted them some short-term money, it doesn't spring to the public consciousness. And quite frankly, those punches that you would have laughed off at 29, you really have a problem laughing off when you're in your 40s. Let me close with just a few other boxing stories. Marius Wach, 1-year suspension for steroid use. right? All I can say is if you don't believe that the sport has a problem with performance-enhancing drugs, then you need to ask yourself how so many championship-level contenders and champions are testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs, right? Rightly or wrongly, let me just say, there are reports out there that Lamont Peterson failed a drug test, Andre Berto failed a drug test. Now we have a guy challenging a Klitschko for the heavyweight title who failed a drug test, and apparently there's enough evidence where he got suspended for a year, right? Wake up, PEDs are a major problem in boxing. Also, Paulie Malignaggi, Shane Mosley. Apparently those two guys are having a hard time signing the dotted line, right? That fight might not happen for whatever reason. So now Malignaggi is talking about fighting Marcus Maidana. Of course he wants to fight Marcus Maidana because Devin Alexander has already laid out the blueprint for how to beat Marcus Maidana with movement, right? Just look at that fight that even Maidana, after the fight, conceded he lost. Now here's where a great trainer comes in. Mikey Garcia's trainer, his older brother, Robert Garcia, is now training Marcus Maidana. And let me just say, Malignaggi, Maidana, they haven't signed the dotted line. Everyone wants to fight Maidana. Even Lucas Mathis is in the sweepstakes if he gets by Mike Dallas and can't fight Danny Garcia, the champion, for whatever reason, right? But just understand, of all the fighters I've seen, the fighter who has upped his game the most by changing trainers has been Marcus Maidana, who, under new trainer Robert Garcia's tutelage, looks like a completely different fighter. It's shocking, folks. So keep an eye on that possible Paulie Malignaggi versus Marcus Maidana fight. Finally, it's come out that Mikey Garcia wasn't the only one with a broken nose when he fought Orlando Salido. After the fight, Salido went to a hospital and found out that he had a broken nose. Right? Now, let me just say this. I don't fault any fighter because, really, boxing's entertainment. For saying, you know what, I like the way I look. If my nose is broken, I'm going to tell the referee, I'm going to tell the ring doctor, especially if it's an accidental headbutt, and all I have to do is tell people that my nose got broken as a result of the accidental headbutt, have them confirm it, examine me, and then, I win the title. I'll say that, it was Mikey Garcia's right to do that. Right? I'm not questioning him in any way for doing that. What I will say, though, is what Salido has said. He thought he was turning that fight around. He thought he had time to get a stoppage. Well, now, after looking at Rocky Martinez, and keep in mind, this is a sore spot. This is an easy fight to sell. Martinez is the champ, one division up. Martinez is also Puerto Rican. And Puerto Ricans remember Orlando Salido coming to their country twice and taking out national hero Juanma, who was unbeaten before Salido did that. Well, now Salido, who's a warrior, wants to fight Rocky Martinez, no doubt, because he feels that Burgos won that fight and he feels that Martinez will fall apart, right? Also, who knows, there might be some problem making weight for Salido because Salido's punch resistance did look off against Mikey Garcia. Either Garcia hits that hard, either Salido was that lackadaisical, or perhaps he's older, has problems making the weight, and it's affecting his punch resistance, right? Well, he wants to fight Rocky Martinez. You can put me down now, right after a Salido loss, with saying that if Salido fights Rocky Martinez, I'm going to take Orlando Salido in that fight. Martinez strikes me as a very hard worker and overachiever. I just don't see anything outside the box with him, right? And my hunch is Salido realizes that if he can get a piece of the belt at 130, there are a lot of fights that are going to materialize for him. So keep an eye on that. Well, that's all I have for this edition. Let me know what you think about any aspect of it. Will Kelly Pavlik stay retired? Should Kelly Pavlik be retired? Who wins a Malignaggi Marcus Maidana fight? Is the punishment of Marius Wach too lenient or too severe? And of course, Orlando Salido versus Rocky Martinez. Who do you like in that one? Let us all know. I hope you leave a lot of comments here on this video. I also hope you visit us at gamblersadvisory.com and on Roku at Dwyer Boxing, a private channel. Thanks for stopping by.